Well, it is so amazing to be in front of a number of my fellow colleagues as growth investors. As some of you might know inside a little bit, we're technically 80 billion of AUM as of January, and I think it's been officially noted that we just completed a good part of raising Fund 13, which is a 10.5 billion raise, which I can officially say now, and it'll conclude hopefully with another 2 more billion by January to come to somewhere just south of 100 billion of assets under management. So today at the Alpha Markets Summit here, I wanted to spend a little bit of time on what's really happening in the world of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and why this current phase of software is genuinely different and why it matters for growth. And so just to start off with, I thought I would play a video. I don't know if anyone has any familiarity with what this might be that you're seeing on screen. Doom. That's right. There's no audio on this. There will be audio in a second for something I'll play later. Well, guess what? It's actually not Doom. It's actually 3,000 hours of video that's been brought into a generative pre-trained transformer, a diffusion model that was able to learn all the physics, all the mechanics, all the gameplay of how Doom could be played without ever playing the game itself. The reason why I mentioned, and this, by the way, happened about 8 weeks ago. The reason why I mentioned this is our models are getting more capable, more profoundly intelligent, more understanding of how humanity lives and works and breathes. It can create games. It can create new systems. It can offer all kinds of potential in both our consumer and our work lives. And this is why I wanted you to start to think about this from a growth standpoint, that we haven't quite seen this in AI systems up to this moment. The rise of generative AI is one that has been backed with over 30 years of profound development from an artificial intelligence and machine learning standpoint. 2 of the Nobel Prizes that were won last week, one was on the origination of the neural networks themselves, right, that Geoffrey Hinton won, as well as an applied use case that the DeepMind's team won for biochemistry. The reason that has happened is that we're now seeing this transformation of what's possible with generative intelligence, generative AI models that we've never seen before. And the biggest thing is the fact that we've moved from these moments where we can take predictive statistical algorithms that are now being used for analytical purposes, things that we've all used in this room for decades, and now start to create things with it. All right, so I made an investment in a company called Jasper with my founder, Jeff Horing, and Jasper was the first product in the market that emerged for marketers to be able to generate content. And that content was as good and as aligned as anything a human would be able to do to generate marketing content inside their respective organizations. That business went from 0 to 60 million in 18 months. Now, crazy story, it hit a brick wall because ChatGPT came along and ate its lunch. And then we had to go back and go figure out how to build an enterprise capability so that it can be sold to CMOs like Salesforce and Adobe and Google, which has done now, and Jasper is again off to the races. But this is different than anything we've seen before. And I do want to dig in a bit. I know this is like a growth investor conference, and you guys want to hear all about the amazing growth stories that are happening. They are happening as we speak, but it's important to understand why. And the reason that this is happening that's different than anything else we've seen before is the rise of a new model called the transformer. This happened in 2017. Read the paper. It's not that long. It's a little wonky, but it's basically the rise of a new model that has been able to incorporate as much data that humanly possible to be fed into the model, and it continues to improve in terms of the intelligence, the intuition, the cognition that's coming out of the models themselves. This is very different because any other deep learning model, any other machine learning model up to this moment, the moment that you threw more data at it, it continued to attenuate. There's a loss function in the model itself. But the GPT, right, the generative pre-trained transformer, was a model that if you threw 7 trillion tokens into a model, you can generate a trillion parameter large language model that incorporated 20% of all human knowledge and was able to convey that insight and intuition and cognition back to you in a way that was human-like in its own reasoning. That we have never seen before. And by the way, it continues to scale because we saw the emergence of GPT-3, and that was about 250 billion parameters that went into the model. We saw the rise of GPT-4, which is about 1 trillion parameters in the model itself. And by the way, just to put it in context, a trillion parameter large language model is the most complex artifact created in human civilization. There has been nothing more sophisticated that has been created by mankind than the emergence of the LLMs that we're seeing today. And there's more coming, and I'll spend some more time on what that looks like. So the vantage point that Insight thinks about this today is, well, what do we do about it, right? There is this emergence of investments that we could be making, and we've really started to unpack what those investments look like. And this is not a leaderboard table, even though it is a leaderboard table, and we have made a tremendous number of investments, particularly in the topic of AI ML. It's about $4.6 billion that we've now deployed into data AI ML companies. The background of it, though, is that you got to be able to think about understanding how and where these growth opportunities are occurring. So a lot of Insight's time has really got into the emergence of specialized models, the emergence of these foundation models like OpenAI, Anthropic, Cohere, which are now scaling to tremendous amounts of revenue accumulation. But that's just the beginning of the story. This is the transformation of all of software. There is literally going to be no element of software that is not going to be touched by the emergence of these models, because every one of those categories of software are going to have a domain-specific model associated with it. And by the way, it's more than potentially software. I kind of half-laughingly say this now. It's like the TAM of what we're about to enter into with this AI first-driven age is at minimum all of software. It could be all of humanity. And then that's not a hyperbole, because this is impacting the way that we live and the way that we work every single day. And that's not like theory that's coming down the pike. This is happening as we speak right now. If you use GPT-3 or GPT-4 at work, BCG consultants have been able to look at side by side what it looks like between the use of GPT-4 and the lack of use of GPT-4 in their own work. It turns out that if you're using it, you're able to produce 15% more output. You're able to do it 25% faster as consultants. Pretty high-powered work. The lowest rung of consultants are now elevated to the best consultants in the organization. Like, to put it in perspective, the entrance of the steam engine in the late 1800s was about 14% increase in productivity at work. This is the steam engine for the industrial age, now going into the information age. And that, I can't be more explanatory about how this is now sort of changing everything we know. A lot of where our time is spent is now thinking about the models evolving, the new infrastructure emerging. I'm not going to exhaust you with all the details. You're happy to come up and hang out with me and talk about these things, the design patterns that are coming next, and how do we build a responsible set of systems. What I want to leave this conversation with is, look, it's not all rainbows and unicorns. There's a lot to figure out here. Models are still hallucinating. We're getting through that. We have to have better causality, better explainability. Because up to this point, all the models that were built were deterministic models, right? These machine learning models had known outcomes. LLMs are not deterministic. They're probabilistic. They think and reason like humans. We are, as a species, probabilistic in our thinking, and so are the models that we're creating in this new world. There's a lot of privacy concerns to think through, because what goes into models, turns out Samsung engineers were trying to figure out how to optimize some code, and they threw all of their open source, their closed source code into one of these models. And it turns out now that that model is imbued with all of the knowledge of Samsung's closed source code. That happened, right? There was a lawyer a few a year ago that was really tired and was trying to get his casework done, and he decided to throw it into OpenAI, and turns out like it spit back a bunch of results that looked like reasonable information, but it was basically hallucinating cases that never existed. And he almost got disbarred from the Florida bar because of what he had done. So again, these are not going to be easy journeys that we're entering upon, but what I did want to convey is that these are quite transformational. And so people talked about, okay, this is only just about images, this is only just about text. This is what Runway shipped about 4 weeks ago. There's nothing here that wasn't generative from a prompt. There was no rendering, there was no pixels. It was literally all defined by a diffusion model. I think you get the point. So where do we go from here? Well, it's a massive build that's underway. I don't even know if it's going to be worthwhile. I don't think anyone in any room knows, but it took $500 million and over 10,000 homes of power to be able to build a GPT-4 cluster. As we speak right now, we're building clusters that are an order of magnitude larger to be able to deliver, call it the GPT-5 style model, something that might have about 10 trillion to 50 trillion parameters in the model. We actually might run out of humanly available data to train the models of this scale, right? So we might never reach the scale that we're talking about, but the race that we're on is to be able to create a general intelligence that is as capable, perhaps even more capable than humans now. And that gets really weird really, really quickly, right? Because there's a question of like, okay, if we go down this path, what is the outcome? Why should we bother? One of the things that I would recommend folks look at, it's a bit of a long, crazy, batshit crazy paper, to be honest, by a guy named Leopold Aschenbrenner. He used to do forecasting for OpenAI. I wrote a 156-page paper in June of 2024 called Situational Awareness, and it is about how everything changes from this moment on. The thesis that I was really caught aback by was this last slide that I'm showing here. It's not the fact that like we are going to reach these moments where like humans are somehow going to be replaced by machines, but what if we can have an intelligence that could do all of the work that is possible for us in the future, including the development of new research. And if we could automate all that research, what would that appear like for cognition, for labor, for science and technology breakthroughs, for robotics, for the military, for GDP? It all starts to become acceleratively transformational. And I think that's the thing that I just want any and every growth investor to kind of walk in, and you can be skeptics about it, but this is happening, and it's happening now, and this decade is the moment of transformation. Bigger than the internet, bigger than mobile, bigger than the cloud. We're here, and I hope you're part of this journey as well. Cool.
Can you hear me? Got it. Great. Well, since we only have a few more minutes, why don't we dive right in? So you mentioned if the size and scope of the opportunity, and I debate internally with my team how big AI's impact is going to be. You mentioned it sort of at the end, but you didn't really sort of put any numbers to that.
Sure.
Would you want to throw out some thought experiments about what that might look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think the hard numbers right now are really the accretion of value that's going on, no surprise, in the infrastructure itself, right? And you can certainly see that with, NVIDIA's own stock price, but it's backed by a business that is growing in tremendous leaps and bounds. But that's like thinking about what the investment on the infrastructure around the internet looked like back in, call it the mid-90s, right? Or it looks like what the mobile investment looked like circa the arrival of the iPhone in '07, right? It turns out that the most popular search engine in 1999 was Alta Vista. Why? Because Google didn't exist. 1997, actually, was Alta Vista, because Google didn't exist at that moment. And it turns out that, the arrival of the killer application for mobile wasn't until 2011, and that was Uber, right? So we have not even scratched the surface of where the applications are coming, and my sense is that's where the biggest accretion of value is, above and beyond the infrastructure that is already starting to lay the plumbing down.
I'm gonna throw this out. So let's say 20% of U.S. GDP and 20% of the S&P is tech today.
Yeah.
What percentage could AI represent? Just to give you some, is it 2%? Is it 10%? Is it?
Well, it's at least 20%.
You think it's an additional 20%?
I think it's going to shrink the current software markets that haven't figured out a way to enable themselves. This is going to feel like a massive, I would say, compression event for software in the near term that will expand the opportunity of software in the long term. And I think we've seen these cycles before, by the way. I mean, think about what CRM, so I was employee 200 at Salesforce, by the way. Think about what CRM looked like pre-Salesforce, right? Salesforce came in and shrunk that market, right? And collapsed that market before it became the scale of the business that it became over time. And I think we're going to see a deflationary cycle for software. And I think SaaS, as we know it, from a, call it, user-based pricing standpoint, has already suffered headwinds. I said this was going to happen 2 years ago, and now we're seeing that in both public and private comps. But this shrinkage that's happening is what's really going to create the moment that AI drives that replacement value.
So maybe as much as 20% of GDP.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
100%.
In what time frame?
Less than 10 years.
Less than 10 years. All right. You heard it here first.
Could be as much as 5.
Okay.
But that's a hard one, right? Because you got to still see the shrinkage of that software occur. So I'm more comfortable with 10.
Okay. We spent a lot of time at Alpha thinking about this dynamic where investors in Rad AI, Shield AI, V, and Pearl. You're an investor in many more than that. We talked about this briefly in our prior chat. In terms of moats, in terms of barriers to entry in this segment, where do you point to the most, and how do you look at that?
Yeah, so the underpinning of everything that you saw here, it turns out, is very different from what we've seen in the last sort of few decades around all things AI related. And I think Andrew Ng, one of the godfathers of AI, one of Geoffrey Hinton's progenitors, said this quite well. He basically said, we moved from a world of model-driven scale in AI to data-driven scale in AI. And he's right? It turns out there's nothing in these algorithms today that is profoundly different from the arrival of the attention zone you need paper and the transformer architecture. They're going to keep tweaking it, and we're going to see slight evolutions of this. But what's really driving this is data, right? And I think for most organizations in the enterprise, which is where I spend most of my time, the value and accretion and, frankly, the differentiator is going to be super high-quality proprietary data. And if you have super high-quality proprietary data, you're actually going to be a beneficiary of this shift that's happening. And if you don't, you're going to be left behind.
Great. That's highly applicable, and I think to many who are evaluating the space. If they don't have proprietary data, forget about it.
I don't make any new investments in companies that I can't figure out what their data moat is at this point.
You see any near-term public company beneficiaries of AI beyond the 7 that are kind of blowing out? And
Yeah, I think there's going to be more coming that are not public yet. I mean, clearly, whenever Databricks goes out, that's going to be a big beneficiary. I can't wait to see that happen in 2020, hopefully 5. But I do think that there are a number of players that, because the data continues to accumulate, they're going to be, in a good place. I cannot talk about public companies in terms of specific names because we're an RIA, and I will literally never be allowed to get on stage again if I start to throw out public company names. But I think you get a sense of where, I will just say this, and we'll leave it at that. Companies that are predicated on user-based pricing today in public SaaS markets are not in a good place. And they're going to have to transform themselves to get to usage-based models, and some of them, they're call it, AI pixie dust thrown on top of their existing products and services is a sham, and we're already starting to see that.
Great, thanks.
That's all I can say.
This is great. By the way, one more last question.
You guys can follow the cookie crumbs from there.
Fund 13 still open for new investments?
Fund 13 is still open till January, so anyone who, it's going to close pretty quickly here, but we did announce, or it got leaked or whatever, that we did finish raising $10.5 billion. It will close in January, so this is the last whistle stop if anyone wants to join Fund 13.
Great. Thanks, George.
Thank you again.